So welcome to this afternoon's Cultural Liaison presentation. My name is Mindy McFarland with Prevention and Early Intervention, and we're very happy to have Riba Eshanzada with us to share her presentation on engaging the Muslim American and MENA community. Just a little reminder, some housekeeping, if you can please turn on your camera to participate if you are able to. Also, just being mindful of any background noise that you may have, and so making sure you're on mute. We are going to be recording this presentation, and so we will be able to share that out with you afterwards. And yes, you will have access to the recording. I see that come up in the chat. And also, we will have a survey link at the end that I'll drop in the chat for you all to share your feedback with us from today as well. So I'd like to hand it now over to Riba, who's going to share with us about serving the Muslim American and MENA community.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Riba Eshanzada, like Mindy mentioned. So we'll just go brief about, how to engage and give you guys some background, because I think context is extremely important when we're talking about a minority community, especially when they are misunderstood or they're kind of like we're not familiar with. So the context becomes extremely imperative that we learn about that. And also, if you guys have any questions, you could raise your hand virtually, or you could unmute yourself and ask a question. You're more than welcome to do that, because some of the topics, if I go fast, let me know. I have a tendency of doing that. All right. So as sure you guys are aware of the objectives of today's topics. We'll talk about the religion of Islam, and we'll talk about why that is important. We'll talk about the Muslims in America, the rise of Islamophobia, common misconceptions and stereotypes and barriers that the community faces seeking treatment for mental health, and ways and effective strategies that could kind of help you guys as providers in connecting with the community. All right, so Middle East and North Africa, so the MENA category. All right, so we have seen this before. This is like kind of like a newer concept, I would say. I remember looking into it. The term MENA actually refers to this area of the map, right? So North Africa and Middle East, right? Middle Eastern and North African. But that is actually different depending on, the geographical line actually changes depending on different websites that you look at, depending on who you're talking to. Some people will consider MENA to be larger or smaller or whatever, and there is an alternative to it, which is called WANA, it stands for Middle East and Western Asia. MENA is predominantly used in academia, and it's predominantly used in military. And this concept of MENA actually originated by the Europeans. Okay, the Europeans, was like, it's synonymous for, MENA is synonymous for Muslim majority countries. That's what it's synonymous for. Even though we tried to separate the two, it's kind of difficult, because, and we'll talk about why that's difficult. Again, some people think like Central Asia is part of MENA, and it's not. So again, depending on who you're talking to, what does that look like? All right. So in order to kind of understand how we serve this MENA population in the Muslim majority countries, we have to kind of understand how they perceive culture, right? We perceive culture in the Western regions, in Western countries, for example. We see it like kind of, it's very geographically based. We kind of categorize culture based on like superficial stuff. For example, color of your skin, the language you speak, or the food that you eat, the music that you listen to, and all that good stuff, right? In this region, it's a lot different. They don't see culture in those terminology for the most part, right? We're talking about predominantly, because 93% of this region identify as Muslim. So we kind of have to understand, what does that look like? So religion is practiced very much differently than it does in America. Again, 93% of the region consider themselves to be Muslim. And we have obviously Christians and Jews in that region as well. But again, Muslims being the majority of the population out there. So why is that significant, right? Why is this significant? Okay, who cares if 93% of them identify as Muslim? Because it's extremely diverse, right? So when somebody is Muslim, the Islamic tradition becomes the primary culture. I don't know if that makes any sense. If it doesn't, I'll repeat it. The Islamic culture becomes the primary, right? Everything else becomes secondary, right? For example, right? We have different types of nationalities from different types of let me go to this map, for example, right? Indonesia, for example, right, is considered an American terminology, AP or Asian American, right? Pacific, this is like a Pacific Islander, but majority of the population of Indonesia is considered Muslim. So when we had in the beginning of the year, when we had like the Lunar Festival and all the activities, the Indonesian community, although may care about the lunar festivities and all that stuff, and identify in their Indonesian roots, but their primary culture becomes the Islamic tradition, if that makes any sense. So Pakistan, India, Bangladesh is South Asia. So that's why MENA is very diverse, right? If we go back to this other here, the breakdown, like I said, 93% by 2050 is 93 is going to go slightly go up. So again, we have to kind of understand the Islamic tradition to engage them in an effective way. So again, this is where Islam was originated in Saudi Arabia. So this is like another misconception that we think like, oh, all Arabs are Muslim and all Muslims are Arab. That's not true. Egypt has a lot of Christians. Palestine has a lot of Christians and Jews, or Syria, Iraq, different parts of the region have different nationality, different religious practices. And from what I know of, like say, for example, Syrian Christians or Iraqi Christians, they practice, or even Palestinian Christians, they practice Christianity slightly different the way they practice it in America. If we look at the global map, right? So this is considered again MENA, right? Middle East and North Africa, but we have a huge population in other places like Australia. We look at France, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, have a lot of anti-Muslim and anti-Islam laws that are kind of coming up on a daily basis, but nonetheless, they have a huge Muslim population. California, where we at, there's about 5 to 10% of our population is considered Muslim. So it's very diverse again. So all of this, like somebody from California, somebody from France, somebody from Russia, their primary culture will become Islam. Everything else will become secondary. I have a friend from Argentina. She's a convert to the religion, and she still, the food and the culture, everything else is the same, but now the primary culture of her day-to-day, is now Islamic. So when we talk about this, what is Islam? Do we have an idea? We know it's a religion, right? So what does that mean? So the religion of Islam is actually an Abrahamic religion. Has anybody seen this black cube before on television, on, I don't know, any type of article? You could say yes, thumbs up, or no. This is actually in Saudi Arabia, right? So we go into like understanding the culture and the religion of Islam for us to understand the what we're talking about, right? And how to engage it. So this is actually the first house of worship, right? This was actually built by Abraham. So that's why Islam and Muslims have the Abrahamic tradition like Jews and Christians do. So we believe as Muslims, there's one religion. It just evolved over time, with different times, with different prophets. So we don't deny any prophets, but it's just that it just evolved. So this black cube was like the first house of worship for an unseen God by Abraham and his son Ishmael, right? And even in the Genesis, it's mentioned that I think it's Genesis, that when Abraham was commanded to take Ishmael and Hagar in the middle of the desert, that desert is Saudi Arabia, and they build this house there. So Muslim Americans, going back, so everybody who understands Islam, they come from 75 different nationalities. So it's kind of neat. Our job becomes a little bit easier as providers. So yes, you would have to know, the secondary, and I don't want to say the secondary culture, whatever the culture is, whether from Indonesia, from China, from Mexico, or from France, whatever, but the primary is easier to understand, and it's 75 nationalities. So you get to touch 75 nationalities. If you ask them what their religious beliefs are and they identify as Muslims, so to make that your primary focus. So they comprise of 75 nationalities. Globally, there are about 2.5 to 3 billion Muslims around the world. And according to Pew Research Center, there are about 3 to 6 million Muslims in US, with a growth rate of 100,000, which I think these numbers are extremely low. Some estimate that about 3 million Muslims are in California alone. And we know Michigan has a huge population, Texas has a huge population, New York, Washington. So these numbers are not counted accurately because we don't capture census correctly in America, I should say, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, and how that we have like data inequality in America. Really, we have data inequality that kind of like cuts deep, and that's why we see a lot of services that are very cookie cutter, right? Because we don't legally or nationally, or we don't recognize certain stuff. There was actually, I had a conversation with the UCR School of Social Policy, and the gentleman, the doctor who heads it, and he actually has a article, or published an article, what is considered Asian, right? So when we think about Asian, we have like an image in our mind. I'm Asian. I'm from the continent of Asia, for example. I'm Central Asian, right? But if you say to like anybody, like, oh, you're Asian, they will think like, oh, so what's your, where you're from? We think about East Asia. We don't think about Central. We don't think about Southeast Asia. We don't think about Western Asia, which becomes really confusing. All right. So with that being said, like I said, we are actually one religion. So how is that one religion kind of spelled out to us and believe in our belief system, right? So this is actually a verse from the Quran, right? Where God commands the prophet, peace be upon him, our prophet Muhammad, that, that we've sent down the same thing to everybody, right? We send down what we send down to Abraham, we send down what we send down to Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 sons of Jacob, and to Moses and to Jesus. And we find no distinction between them. So as a Muslim, another a misconception is that, oh, you don't believe in Moses and Jesus or all of that stuff. That's not true. That's not true. We do believe in, it says we make no distinctions in them, and we all submitted in Islam. So it's like in Islam, like when I show this to somebody and they're like, wait, what do you mean in Islam? But Moses wasn't Muslim. Moses was Jew. Jesus wasn't Muslim. But again, the word Islam, what does that actually mean, right? What does the word Islam actually mean? It is not like, for example, different religions are named after, like, for example, Buddhism is named after Buddha, right? Judaism is named after Yehuda, or Christianity is named after Christ. Islam is an actual attribution. It's an attribution of a person. So whoever possesses a certain attribution is considered Muslim, if that makes any sense to you guys. So by common dictionary, this is what Islam, the word Muslim means, all right? Islam and Muslim, humbling oneself, obeying command, kind of staying away was prohibited, and worshiping God alone, right? So we don't have like sub-gods or anything like that. And having faith, right? So it's all very great. But the technical word Islam actually means to surrender or submission, right? So the word salam or shalom in Hebrew is the same mean, peace, right? Is the root word of Islam. In the religious context, it means that the surrounding one's will without compulsion to a true will of God in an effort to achieve peace, and which will go into kind of like when we are providing services to our client, that actually plays a huge role, right? And we'll talk about and how that plays a role in your client's day-to-day life. So a little bit of background, what does Islam and what are some of the tenets of it? Because it's important to kind of know the background. And when we are seeing people, what does that look like? So obviously you have faith, which is called iman, right, in Arabic. You have faith, you basically it means belief in oneness of God, right? And believing in the angels, believing in the books, right? When I say books is plural, meaning that we don't dismiss Torah and Bible, right? Believe in the books. Believe in the prophets, right? Believe in the day of judgment and believe in divine decree. That becomes an important component again when we're dealing with people on the day-to-day. Ihsan is another tenet of it, which means worshiping God as you see him, right? So that again, it becomes, if you see somebody may look rigid, but having ihsan, and not just on your worship, but in your day-to-day, in your work, in your studies and everything, we have to have ihsan, meaning you have to achieve excellence. Whatever you do, as minimal, as small as it may be, is to perfect that art, right? To perfect whatever it is that you're doing. And then Islam has 5 pillars, which we'll go over quickly. And the only 2 texts that your Muslim client, despite where they're from, will only subscribe to 2 texts, the Quran and the Hadith. Okay, the Quran is the actual book, right? Which again is that kind of like it has evolved over from the Psalms to the First Testament, Second Testament, and then the Quran and the Hadith. Hadith is actually becomes extremely important in the practicing of somebody's day-to-day. Hadith means it's a saying and the doing of the prophet, right? So this is kind of like a little bit background. What does that mean? It's not everybody could be like, oh, I'm doing X, Y, and Z because it's the Hadith. No, it's not, because it has to have isnad, meaning it has to have proof, right? And it has to have a chain of narrators and all that good stuff. It's extremely comprehensive science, as people actually spend their whole lifetime verifying or studying the hadith of the prophet, right? So it becomes extremely important on where does the hadith collection comes from, right? So the biggest collection comes from Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. Sahih literally means correct, true, valid, or sound, because they have gone through the gruesome process. So these are some of the sciences which we won't go over on what does it look like and all that stuff. So we have seen that even within our own community. In fact, like people will say something that will fit their narrative of things, how they want things to be. And they're like, oh my gosh, just hadith. No, it's not. You know what I mean? So it's really easy to kind of, some people will manipulate stuff. We've seen that happen over and over again, but these are how you classify hadith, what is considered a weak hadith, what is considered a strong hadith, and what is, and which one you follow, which one you just kind of put aside. And then we have the 5 pillars of Islam, right? This is a very active religion here, which is basically, you have the shahada, right? When somebody becomes Muslim, we don't have any type of ceremony. For example, they study the religion and then they say their shahada, right? They will learn, new babies or youngins, when they start speaking, they learn how to say their shahada. It's just basically a testimony saying that there's no other God worthy of worship except one true God, and the prophet is the last messenger. That doesn't mean that the rest of them are not. It just means that he's the last of it, right? And if we have time, or if we do this like a full version, I was telling Mindy before the presentation, this is actually a 2-day course where we go really in depth with each. When we talk about how somebody comes into the fold of Islam and how somebody comes out of it. So the Shahada becomes extremely integral part of it, extremely important part of it. And Salah is basically the 5 daily prayers that we have. It's just kind of like, I don't know if anybody's seen a Muslim pray before. We pray with our whole body, which is nice because it's kind of like a form of yoga. We pray for with everything that we have, and really, no matter how busy we get with our daily life, so we just kind of like reshift our focus, and we could actually use the Salah as a form of mindfulness, right? To pray mindfully when we're talking to our clients. Zakat is a third one. When somebody starts earning, charity is compulsory, it's an obligation, it's 2.5% of your income that goes into charity. It's not something that, oh, if I want to pay donation or not, it becomes a compulsive that you have to do it, whether you like it or not. And then, of course, if you could afford it, and then we fast the month of Ramadan, and then we go to pilgrimage once in a lifetime. And the Black Cube that I showed you guys earlier, we go there and we do the same ritual that Abraham did and his wife Hajar did, and how from that time. So Hajj becomes an Eid, a celebration. We just actually had it, and the July 10th was Eid al-Adha, which is the biggest Eid. And before that, people go out and do the pilgrimage. Again, when you go there, we don't have any tribalism, racism, because everybody looks the same. Everybody wears the same white garment, and they just do the same thing that Abraham did, not even Muhammad, but what Abraham did and how he performed Hajj. So going back to Muslims in America, okay, any questions? I'll start. That was like a very, very short summary of what Islam is. Any questions and or comments? You can unmute yourself if you need to. Okay. Muslims in America, like I said, we are 75 nationalities in America and counting, right? Counting meaning because we're expanding, different nationalities are converting at a speed of light. So the history of Muslims, right? People think, unfortunately, people think like, oh, Muslims just appeared right after 9/11. They just all look Muslim for all of a sudden. No, we've been here. Some actually historians believe that Muslims have been here since the 14th century, right? Since the 14th century. Okay, so but the real wave of Muslims actually came in the slave ships. So the indigenous Muslims in America are actually the Black community, the African American community, because that's who they built the community for us, right? I am on two monitors, so it's kind of confusing. All right, but then we had a huge migration from Middle East, from Syria, Lebanon. They settled in the Midwest and then the Dakotas. And of course, we've seen an influx actually recently of the Afghan refugees coming in after Taliban took over. But just to kind of give you guys, again, we think that, you know, all Muslims in America are Arabs. In fact, these are all slaves who came and held on to them. The first gentleman that you see here, his name is Omar ibn Said from Senegal. He was born in 1770. And at the time of his death, he was actually enslaved for 56 years. The second gentleman that you see here, his name is Yara Mahmoud. He was also enslaved. And these gentlemen actually kind of kept their traditional Islamic garment, that with the hat. And this gentleman as well, he kept, and he was actually known, his name is Ayub Suleiman. He actually kept his garment, and he was known to go into the fields. When he would work, he would maintain his identity. He would maintain his identity. And this gentleman actually wrote a manuscript in Arabic for other slaves to hold on to their religion, because majority of these slaves who came here in America were actually forced into leaving their religion, right? And they would actually kind of force feed them pork products, and really give them a hard time. If you can imagine, only like fasting, praying, and going through the trauma that they went through. So again, we have our indigenous community, like I said, is from the continent of Africa that were brought to America. When I told you guys earlier that we don't know how to count census accurately, this is what I mean. So 4 in 10 Muslims in America, adults, are considered white. Okay, so when I fill out legal forms, I'm considered white, not Hispanic, right? I'm not white, but if I put in Asian, they're gonna think of something completely. We have like what we consider Asian in America is very stereotypical. Same with Blacks. Like, for example, my children are mixed, right? So I'm from Afghanistan. My kids are half a quarter Egyptian and a quarter Libyan. They're from North Africa. So my daughter was doing her college application and she put an Asian and African American, right? And one of the colleges that responded about was like, oh, you will love our Black union. Like, but I'm not Black, you know? So we just don't know how to count census. So it's like, I feel like she was feeling really bad. She's like, I feel like I gypped the system by putting African American and Asian because they have well, that's not your problem. If we just don't know what, we have an image of something and we're just going to stick to that image. So if we take a look at this, right? All Muslims are 41%, right? Foreign born, majority are foreign born, but we have second and third generation. Let's take a look at that. Second and third generation white, 52% white, 7% Black, 22% Asian, Hispanic, believe it or not. Yeah, people don't think like we have a lot of Hispanic. We have a huge Hispanic population, actually. Actually, the biggest wave of converts right now is the Latinx community. And so when we do with the community, when we do big events, not only we have English parallel sessions, we have Arabic, and we have Spanish, because a lot of our community is growing, is the Hispanic community. But again, second and third generation, we've had them in the past, but it's unknown. The way we capture them is kind of wonky. Like I said, Latinos are one of the fastest growing segments of Muslim. About 6% of US Muslims are now Latinos. Again, when we talk about, let's just say, Latinx community, it's not that it's taking over, but the Muslim culture, the 5 daily prayers, for example, the fasting of Ramadan, those become primary, right? Because the religion takes precedence over anything else. We don't recognize tribalism, nationalism. Actually, is very much explicit in the text in the Quran, saying that where God says, I've created you guys, I created you and nations and tribes so you may know one another. There's not a competition, so we just get to know one another. Before World War I, a little bit of history lesson, we didn't have a whole lot of geographical lines, especially in Central Asia and other parts of Middle East. We didn't. It was after the Ottoman Empire fell, that's when we started having lines, geographical lines, and kind of cutting it up to different segments, what is now known. So we don't do well with borders. And that's what it's kind of, it doesn't matter to us. Latinos are discovering their own historical culture ties to Islam. At one point, Spain was a Muslim country, Muslim majority country. So a lot of anything that starts with an AL or is actually has an Arabic root to it. So with all of that diversity, we still have a whole lot of, unfortunately, stereotypes that we have. So this is actually a study done by Institute for Social Policy and Understanding in 2019. They did a survey on how Muslims are stereotyped. Okay, so the common stereotypes, right? The term Islamophobia is a term that they use. It actually dates back to 1900s, but a whole lot of it has to do in the 80s and 90s. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the movies in the 80s and 90s. Every terrorist looked really much Arab, and any hijacking in land in Beirut somehow, some way. So there's like a lot of negative portrayal in the media, which we'll talk about. But a lot of it, in the survey revealed that most people in the United States believe that most Muslim living here are more prone to violence than others. They discriminate against women, and that they're hostile towards the United States, and they're less civilized than other people, and they're actually responsible for acts of violence. So that's the typical stereotype that we have. And actually, less civilized, which is the one that kind of like gets to me every time, personally, because actually we had at the time of if you guys ever studied like the golden era of Islamic civilization, you will see a lot of a lot of science that we see now is derived from Islamic culture. Even like, you know, I don't know if any of you guys like wonder why, you know, in graduations, they wear gowns, you know, why do we wear gowns? Because it's actually taken from the Islamic culture. During the golden era, a scholar, like Muslims were considered scholars and well-educated, so they would always wear thobe, right? They would always wear flowy stuff. So Europeans kind of like, oh, we want to be educated like that. So then they added a gown into when somebody became a scholar, they added a gown. So the tradition of cap and gown is actually from the Islamic tradition. Anyhow, so with that, we have a lot of discrimination in a systematic discrimination. So these are the numbers actually that kind of, these are the numbers from pre and post election of 2016. So we see a lot of physical assaults, we see a lot of verbal and written assaults, and we see property damage. And that kind of skyrockets post-election. So unfortunately, what happens during an election cycle, you know, Islamophobia, it's a platform to kind of rally up the base, some bases, you know, it's a ticket. It's kind of like that hot topic that people kind of talk about during election without any regard to how that could affect a community. So therefore, we have a lot of systematic racism. So these people, you know, like if an elected official or somebody who's running for any type of office has want to rally up their base, they will say something, and then post-election we see a whole lot of this. So out of the result of that, so we have a lot of anti-Sharia bills, and we'll talk about what the heck Sharia means, right? We have a lot of anti-Sharia. These are just the three. There's like a whole host of them. So we have this anti-Sharia bill, which was HR 6075. This is Jihad Prevention Act. The bill aims to amend the Immigration and Nationality Act that requires non-citizen to attest that they will not attempt to implement Sharia within the United States border in order to be eligible to come in. So it's still like, you can't, right? So then you had the National Security Entry-Exit Registry System. This is basically anybody, a non-citizen male over age of 16 that were predominantly from Arab and Muslim countries, they had to have a special registration and kind of like make sure that they are, you know, they had to register, right? So, but this was kind of suspended in 2003, but the framework still is up and running. And I don't know if you guys remember in the last administration, they were requiring in, was it 2018-ish or 17, they were like, we want all the last administration, we want Muslims to register because this framework was still in existence. So a lot of people, whether they were Muslim or not, they kind of jumped up and said like, oh, we all gonna register as Muslim because this took, it looked very similar to pre-Holocaust. So yeah, they wanted, you know, the Muslim community to start registering and then putting like kind of what do you call it? Have like some type of an identification to carry with them. And then you have CVE, right? This was actually created by the Obama administration in 2011. This is actually the most detrimental of them all, because this is kind of like empowering local partners to prevent violent extremism in the United States, again, because it is kind of geared towards or is focused on the Muslim community, because the word violence and extremist or terrorism is kind of reserved for that community. So they created the CVE to kind of give law enforcement the counterterrorism to be, you know, they had the ability to go into the mosques and kind of disguise. And there was a lot of actually entrapment cases, and we'll talk about the FBI in a minute. But this actually, the pilot program and how they did it was actually very, very scary, where they would go, part of the CVE language, the way it read is like, if, let's just say they go under the guise, okay, so the biggest part was they went under the guise of mental health into community. And if somebody disclosed, oh yeah, I have an issue with my son or daughter, and they're like, ooh, you know what I mean? I'm gonna check that box. And if somebody is like, yeah, you know, I have suicidal ideation, they're like, oh, I'm gonna check that box. You know, you could possibly be, you know, an extremist. or a terrorist, any type of or if you were involved at your local mosque, for example, like, oh, you could be that. So everybody, basically the entire community was under surveillance because they checked every box. It's like only human, right? Like if you're involved in the community, if you have issues with like a bonding issue with your son or daughter or whatever, then yeah, you could be considered a violent extremist. So this did the most damage. When I took on my position as a community liaison, I reached out to the Beaumont Mosque, and I said, hey, you know, I am the new liaison with RUHS, behavioral health, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm introducing myself. The administrator paused and he was very honest, which I appreciated. He said, are you FBI? I'm like, oh my God, no, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not FBI. He's like, because I want to know, when you say I'm with the county, what does that mean? What are you collecting? What are you saying to the community? So the mistrust is there. And it's because of stuff like this, right? And then the assault, right? The assault, how it affects the community. The current assault levels have actually increased. This data is from up until 2015, but we have more data from 2019. It's keep going higher and higher. The 5 triggering of anti-Muslim bias incidents, you have ethnicity and national origin. And actually, it's unfortunate because our Sikh community, who are not Muslim, were the receiving end of this, which was unfortunate because the Sikh religion, you know, is predominantly in Southeast Asia. They were turban. It's forbidden in their religion for men to cut their hair. So they're always wearing a turban. So people thought that they were Muslims, so they would attack Sikhs. Muslim men don't wear turbans, by the way. They do if they're out in the Sahara Desert, which is uncommon in America. We wear a kufi, right? It's like a bigger version of yarmulke. So that's what men wear. If you look Muslim, whatever that means, I'm visibly Muslim looking woman with my headscarf. Headscarf, another one, right? We talk about like, oh, you know, they're biased or they're violent against Muslim, but there was actually more violent towards visible Muslim women like myself than, you know, I mean, heck, if on one hand we're saying like Islam is violent towards women, but then we doing the violence against Muslim women is just kind of like, okay. The 5 frequent type of anti-Muslim biases is harassment, you have hate crimes, you have FBI, which talk about. Okay, so the FBI part is pretty big, right? This is why everybody stays away from that has anything to do with anybody that is not of a Muslim community, because of the surveillance. Since 9/11, the community has been under surveillance for the past 20 some odd years. And recently, as actually Council on Islamic Relations, who gathers this data, by the way, they've been fighting this illegal surveillance and entrapment cases since then. And they finally went to the Supreme Court last November and they won, right? So finally the Supreme Court says, yes, this is an illegal surveillance. You guys can't have entrapment cases. You can, an FBI can come as a guise into the community and be like, and do entrapment cases. Entrapment case, if you guys are not familiar, an agent would come. At one point, there was about an average of 3 FBI agents in every mosque. They will come and be like, oh, hey, you know, don't you hate this government? Don't you hate this? And some stupid kid would be like, oh, yeah, you know, I don't like this law. I don't like this. And it'd be like, oh, really? How about if we bomb something? And then this, you know, and pump them up. And if that kid agreed, or this idiot would agree at the community, guess what? They were done for. But guess who prompted them and egged them on to say all of this, right? And introduced them to different ideas. So that's what FBI would do. And finally that came out, and the Supreme Court last November said, yes, that's illegal. This doesn't mean that they're not under surveillance still. It just means that it's like they're limited on what they can do. Okay, so going back to this basically. All right, so this was another way of keeping the community under surveillance. This is Muslim Pro. This was an app that actually I had as well. It actually gave you all of the holidays, where way to face. We face the Qibla, which is the Mecca, the black cube I showed you guys. We face that when we pray. And also there is that prayer times, you know, all the good stuff. So we didn't know that this actually was bought by, this was paid by the government to collect data on the community. So whoever had it, they knew exactly where we were going. So I had this on my phone. So no matter where I went, I was being tracked. everybody, whoever ever had this, and it had like millions and billions of subscribers, everybody was tracked. So it was kind of like a tracking device, and they got caught, and that was like a huge deal. All right, any questions so far before I move on?
Yes, hi. Actually, I do have some questions.
Sure.
Yeah, I've been taking notes, so I'm gonna make a little bit of flashback. You said at the beginning of the lecture that the culture of Muslims, it becomes priority.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be like against integration in any country that they would go, because they would have to follow the culture and not the country rules? Second question, you talked about the numbers of decreasing of Muslims around the world. And I guess it's pretty obvious that when we have a certain number of births in child, like on average, Muslim family, they have 7 or 8 kids versus any Christian or normal family, especially in Europe, they have like 1.2, 1.3. And we all know that practically all the European countries, they suffer from lots of problems with Muslims community that they refuse to integrate, and they are like pretty much imposing their like religions and their cultures everywhere. Third question, you talked about
let me before we move on, if you don't mind me, if I could have you kind of like, it was a whole lot. So the question number 1 is what, and we could take it 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah. So third question, you said the Islam meaning submission, and you did the comparison between like the Prophet and Christ, and like Jesus, when he came, he said, "Peace be with you." With you meaning it's you are free to take or leave. Muhammad, when he came, he stated, "Peace be upon you." Upon, it's 4 kind of obligation, so you don't have a choice. And you mentioned like lots of Christians in different like Middle Eastern countries, like Syria, like in Egypt, and so on. And you probably forgot to mention that all those Christians till today, they suffer big time from like attacks and lack of liberty, and we can state hundreds and even thousands of cases like that. I have lots of I wondered lots of questions. I don't wanna like shower you with all this.
No, because I'm trying to understand the question, because, okay, so peace be with you. When Jesus came and said, let me say, peace be upon you. We say peace be upon you to the prophet because he's dead, right? Peace be upon you, right? So because he died, all right? And when we say to Jesus, peace be with you, because in Islamic tradition, we don't believe Jesus died in the and the cross, right? So we believe in the Jesus' second coming. So that's why we say peace be with you, because we still believe he's alive and he is the Messiah and he's coming back. Okay. Muhammad is not coming back. Jesus is coming back. Okay.
Of course. And yes, and in this case, so we do not believe in the same person.
No.
So we cannot tell
so and that's fine, right? So we don't believe. I mean, so this is so the thing is that we're sharing what the Muslim belief is, right? So obviously, if Christians or Jews believed in the same thing as we did, then they will be Muslim. Obviously, there's a variation, right? Of course. Okay, so that's that. That's why we say peace be upon you versus peace be with you. Okay. What was the second question?
We talked about the numbers of increasing. It's not due to the belief, it's the natality or the number of births, which is totally normal. Because we have 48 Muslim countries all around the world, and none of these countries is considered to be a developed country or like without problems or without issues. All of them they struggle big time. Because
and the struggle, if we could talk about history, and the struggle actually started, you're right, and yes, there is a lot of struggle within the Muslim majority countries, right? And when we say none of them are developed, that's an accurate statement, because the Gulf is very much developed. Part of Turkey is in Europe. That's very much, Turkey is a Muslim majority country. That's very much developed. There are other parts like Syria, like Iraq, like Egypt, like Libya, like Afghanistan, right? Or even India, right? They're not a Muslim majority country, but they have about 30%, I want to say, Muslim population. But what they have in common in those countries is the fact that they were occupied by a European country before, right? So that is the ongoing struggle. So when we could talk about history, like I said, if we go back before World War I, anywhere between, anywhere from Turkey, where the modern day Turkey is, the Ottoman Empire actually controlled all the Balkans, Middle East, and parts of the Hijaz, right, which is now called Saudi Arabia. All the way down to Egypt and Libya, that was under the control of the Ottoman. When the Europeans dismantled the Ottoman Empire, they cut out the pieces and they kind of took over. Since then, that region has not seen peace. You're absolutely right about that.
No, I would. No, I'm kind of against, because Egypt, we have suffered under the Ottoman Empire, and even women, they had to wear the entire like the full niqab, and we had the liberty of women after that was dismantled. And all of those countries that you have mentioned, they suffered big time when the Muslim brother took over, and all these countries are in a big chaotic situation right now. When you mention Syria, Iraq, Libya, Egypt, all of those, and Turkey, they refused to go into the European community because they feared about imposing Islam. They knew that it's a gate to Europe, and it's going to be the end of Europe.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to be logical, because the second part was the reaction of the other countries when you see kind of dangers coming into. So people, it's normally they have to fear what it's coming.
So what do they have to? I guess it's like this sounds like a kind of like a conversation that we could take us on to the side, because I don't want to take away.
I was going to say, I know that Riba has shared that this is usually like over a 2-day training presentation and engagement, and so I appreciate the discussion and questions, and I think that's great. We can continue to have that maybe on like a side conversation. But for the sake of time, is it okay if we continue so we can find out more information for the folks that are here about how to better serve and interact with our communities?
Of course.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you're more than welcome to stay after if you like, and then we could have a discussion. And whoever else would like to join us. Okay, so moving on. All right, so some of the fears, like the gentleman that mentioned, like it's Sharia law, oh my gosh, coming to United States, right? So what does Sharia law mean, right? If anybody has ever lived, as Muslims, we don't believe that, when we come into a country, that we have to change their laws and regulation. That is actually against the teaching of the Prophet. The first time the migration that happened was actually in Ethiopia. It was not called Ethiopia at that time. The first migrants went there, and they lived under the rule by Islamic tradition. We have to abide by the rule of the land. That is the religious context. Now, do some people really adhere to that? No. But the context is different. I think the one thing that we have to kind of mention, the religion is perfect. The people of it is not. Okay. So I don't think that we need to kind of like go and be like, what about this? And what about that? Yes. Well, you know what? As humanity, we have many, many shortcomings, right? But we're talking about the religion itself. Religiously, we are not allowed to change the law of the land unless it's a permissible into that law. Like, for example, polygamy, which is a controversy here, right, is allowed in Islam. Polygamy becomes prohibited in the United States because that is the United States law. Okay. So, anyhow, Sharia law in the United States, I don't know if you guys heard of this book. It's called Thomas Jefferson's Quran. Islam and the founders. Now, Thomas Jefferson was very skeptical about the religion, but I did acknowledge a lot of good in Islamic tradition, and he took a lot out of that when we had our own constitution. For example, family law, child support and alimony is Sharia. Criminal cases, inability to stand trial due to mental illnesses, that is Sharia. Innocent until proven guilty is Sharia. Juvenile, right, ability to determine between what's right and wrong is Sharia. Those what we have taken out, you know, for those who say, oh my God, creeping Sharia. Well, guess what? Sharia been here. We all follow it. Sharia, by the way, means the shortest distance between the two, right? It's a code of conduct. The 10 Commandments is a Sharia, right? So if you look at this is actually a Sharia, right? And worship God alone and do not describe divinity in any way to odd beside him. So that is one Sharia. There's two, that your relationship with your creator and everything else that you deal with, you know, day to day. And do good with your parents, your kin, your orphan, the needy, the neighbor, the traveler, the stranger, a friend by your side, and all of that stuff. And those are Sharia too, right? So there's two types of Sharia. One, the code of conduct that we have with our creator, and everything else that we do on a day-to-day. So that's what Sharia means. Okay, for those who are afraid of the word Sharia, it means code of conduct. Okay. Now we have had a lot of negative impact when it comes to social media, right? Social media is obviously, you know, it's like a double-edged sword with everything that we do in our day-to-day. So there was a study done that reliance on social media for information about Muslims associated with American support for public policy targeting 3 months later, including military action against Muslim countries, separate and more thorough airport security lines and for Muslim travelers. You know how many times I had to go through the TSA for random checks, revoke the right to vote in America, right? Or reliance on personal contact about a Muslim, however, produced the opposite effect, right? So obviously, if you get to know them, despite your political orientation and where you're from, you get to know them, it goes back, it's very basic. It goes back to humanity, right? We're one human race, more than anything. So then even with the coronavirus, right? Coronavirus, actually, this was like actually an article that I saw like got a heading, like coronavirus infects jump by more than 1 million globally under 2 weeks. Right? So this is the terminology, that this is the picture that they use. This is not even US. This is actually Turkey, right? Confirmed deaths in US suppressed 95,000. This was like in the beginning of COVID. But it's very subtle. It's very, very subtle. But in talking about coronavirus, does anybody know these two? Have you really heard of them or seen their pictures? I see Nasaf, no. Okay, so these are the two, Islam and Ugar. Okay, these are the two individuals, it's a couple, actually married couple, behind the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, but you'll never hear it. These are Turks, all right? So they were actually named People of the Year by British Daily and Financial Times. Actually, the term quarantine is actually very Islamic, right? We say quarantine. Actually, there was even a hadith about how to quarantine, right? And he said, the Prophet said, whoever is like, if there is a plague in the land, do not enter it. If there is one, do not leave it, right? So don't leave it. So that is like the word quarantine, right? And God kind of assures, humanity that there is a cure for everything, for every disease in the world, except for old age, right? There's no cure for old age, despite all of them injections. So that ain't gonna work. Anyway, so the effects on the media, negative media on Muslims. So when the religious identity is, if we focus on the identity and stuff, they kind of have a tendency of kind of keeping away, right? They distance themselves from the American culture. The American culture, yeah, we're not in a bubble, we don't like to be in a bubble, but because of especially post 9/11 era that we live in, it's been extremely difficult to integrate because of the mistrust. It's not that we don't want to be, obviously, things are different. The study also revealed that American Muslims who were exposed to negative media representation of Muslims were less likely to be desired acceptance by other Muslims and are more likely to avoid interaction with non-Muslim Americans, right? Negative media portrayal alienates Muslims from their own countries. I'm Generation X Afghan, right? Meaning Generation X is like the ones that don't belong here or there, unfortunately, because I left when I was little with the Soviet occupation, again, without any fault or desire, just the Soviet Union at that time, USSR decided to expand their empire and try to take over another country. And then we lost 2 million people, because why not? So those are the kind of stuff. Now we look at it, and then Taliban took over, then US took over, and now Taliban took over again. So it's like 43 years of war. So we don't have I don't have any association with them, or they don't have any association with me. I don't have a sense of belonging here, and I don't have a sense of belonging there. So again, this is a 2-day training. We could talk about refugee versus what's the difference between a refugee and an immigrant, as a stark difference between the two. So these are just some statistics that, for the sake of time, I won't read it. Indicators of lower Islamophobia are, having a favorable views of Blacks and feminism and higher income, and of course, education and stuff like that. Democratic leaning, which I don't know how much of that is true still. The impact on the community. How does this all impact the community? One could only imagine how detrimental this may be, right? So in 2008, Dr. Ross conducted a study in Brooklyn, New York on the impact of 9/11 on Muslims, and found that all participation except for 4 had fear of hate crime and threats of their safety, anxiety about future, isolation, and loss of community stigmatization. He also stated the attack had 3-fold effect on the community: the attack itself, the backlash from the community, and government policies targeting Muslim. So it was not just, okay, the Twin Towers and all that stuff, it was like the time where our religion was kind of hijacked from us. Another study shows that American faces several types of discrimination: religion, gender, demographic characteristics to lead to microaggression, and assumption that they're not real Muslim, right? So what is microaggression? I'm sure you guys are all familiar, but I'll give you guys an example of a microaggression. Microaggression, I remember one time somebody telling my kid used to play soccer, and one of the parents like, oh my gosh, I have a friend, my neighbor is also Muslim. They are a moderate Muslim like you. And at the surface level, you're like, well, how bad could that be, right? It's bad because by default, we're all extremists, and there are very few selected moderate Muslim. Please don't ever use moderate Muslim with your clients. It's very derogatory. It's horrible to use, and we could say the same thing. Oh my gosh, you look like a moderate Christian. Like, how would that make you feel? Like, what's that supposed to mean anyhow, right? Research also report that Muslim Arab Americans ages 11 to 18 experience accumulated stress, causing withdrawal, sadness, and depression. Nationally, Muslim teenagers typically seek help for school bullying, depression, and substance abuse. And 28%, this is New York public school, 28% of Muslim students report being stopped by police as a result of racial profiling. 7% have been physically assaulted. And these are just kind of, again, by CARE 2020, this is the study that they had done. Harassment and discrimination due to advocacy. They get 73% if you advocate, or if you talk about or write about anything. Discrimination, 73%. By school staff and personnel is almost 18.5%, a little bit over 18.5%. And you have violence, and you have students report feeling uncomfortable with their professor or instructor class talking about Islam, right? Because we have like this preconceived notion and all that stuff of who they are, what they are, and why people need to protect themselves against them, as if they are them. That when the minute we have the they and them, us and them conversation, that's when things go from bad to worse. They're subjugated to bigoted comments about Islam from other students. And there's like the list goes on and on and on. So I'm going to share this slides with you guys so you guys can see some of the statistics. And if you guys are working with school kids or in a school-based programs, to kind of have that awareness with you. All right, so we have more statistics, and just to kind of highlight the high suicide rate amongst Muslim youth. That is, we don't have a number because it's just like any other culture or any other religion, it's kind of frowned upon, right? Because it's like kind of a mortal sin. We don't share those statistics, but there is a lot of suicide amongst the youth, unfortunately. All right, now I try to speed through that part. All right, Islam and mental health. Okay, so Islam and mental health. So this is like the big, so we'll go a little bit quickly over the history of Islam and mental health. It's not a new concept, by the way, for the community. You know, Avicenna, if you guys have heard of him, he's the founder of modern medicine. He also created the mental disorders as conditions that were psychologically based. And the first psychiatry ward, it was actually in Baghdad, Iraq in 705. Baghdad, Iraq at once upon a time was considered the cradle of civilization, right? All of the academia and all these profound stuff used to come from Baghdad, Iraq. And he considered mental disorder as a medical condition. And the treatment included psychotherapy that we know it and drug treatment. And then during the golden era of Islamic civilization, and then there was also Abu Bakr Muhammad, another Al-Razi in 925 CE, he created the concept of psychology, psychiatry, psychotherapy in relation to mental illness. And he actually had a book, definition and symptoms of his book basically mean, you know, the medicine of the how do you say al-tib? Medicine of the soul, right? So unlike, I'll talk about a little bit how we kind of see a holistic approach when we talk about mind, body, and soul and the Western civilization, but we also keep into consideration like the heart as well. So that becomes important. All right, so some of the challenges for Muslims to seeking therapy is mistrust in services, right? Is mistrust, fear of inappropriate treatment, fear of racism, discrimination, language barriers. A lot of people kind of like have the same thing, like, oh, if you're Muslim, you must speak Arabic. I don't speak Arabic. Even like understanding different variations of it. I'm not Persian or Iranian. I don't speak Farsi. I speak Dari, an older dialects. Having a lot of those kind of like cultural barriers and language barriers prohibits individuals to come and seek treatment. I remember talking to one of the PEI provider, I don't remember which one it was, but they were talking about like, oh, so-and-so, you know, speaks, he's from Afghanistan. I'm like, so what do you speak? Do you speak Pashto or do you speak Dari? Because we have two dominant languages, right? And they're completely different. They're completely different from one another. All right, so from the provider side, right, a study was conducted in 2007. They highlighted some of the challenges in serving the community, is the therapeutic alliance, you know, not being able to do that, socio-political context, right? Awareness of personal characteristic competencies that facilitate multicultural setting, and require training in multicultural counseling. And the counselor's lack of proper understanding of the religion, again, of the religion, not of the culture, of the religion, can lead to additional socio-political discrimination against Muslim client. This was actually a study done in 2007. That's not my personal opinion. So that was, a lot of actually studies have shown that. Let me go back. Mental health professionals are generally have very little training in the religion, which becomes, again, like I said, the dominant culture. And that's important, right? If we're serving the community, lack of culture, discouragement, client may initially hesitate to disclose issues or conflicts regarding their religious belief, right? Because there is this notion out there, like I shared for the past hour, that it's a violent thing, it's this and that and the other. So they're not going to come in off the bat and tell you anything. So that's why they just rather not. Truly. A more significant deterrent for a Muslim client is when the counselor is being judgmental, to be honest with you. It's all about judgmental, even your facial expression and how we hold ourselves, where we, even if we're doing group or individual, right? And how we like, oh no, you know, I don't know how to deal with it. And oftentimes I've heard from counselors or from therapists or from whoever, you know, they're just kind of like, I don't know, I'm like kind of hesitant to seeing a Muslim client. Is like they're just another human being within it, especially women. For some reason, I get that a lot for treating Muslim women. I don't know what to say. I don't know, like, I just feel like, is that okay if I say this? Ask. Honestly, a lot of people love to talk about what they believe in and what they are all about. If you just ask and come from a place of wanting to learn, rather than just kind of like, this is what I heard. Is this true? This is what I read somewhere once upon a time. Is this true? This is what I always thought. Is this true? Like, you're not taking your problems and having that person solidify. But if we come from a place of, I want to learn with a true open mind, then you will learn from it with that, right? And they will be less hesitant to share. And then there's like this whole notion, challenging client negatively, blaming their problems on their beliefs or their customs. Well, if you stop doing that, and you see that a whole lot, you know, when we're dealing with teenagers, and we'll get into that, you know, when we're talking to youth, it becomes imperative that we have like that basic understanding of what we're talking about. So the basics of providing therapy or any type of services for your Muslim client is establishing rapport. That goes without saying, right? That goes without saying. That's with everybody. That's just not with a Muslim client, right? But because there is an added mistrust, you want to kind of like make sure that you are doing your due diligence, right? If you have some type of feeling, you know what to do with that, right? You seek counseling or consultation, right? Non-judgmental, it goes having that understanding. And then really therapist role in treatment. What should they expect from treatment? There's that mistrust, right? So you informing them, having like that, your informed consent, for example, having that really diving down to it, it becomes extremely important. What should they expect? What is your role? What are you willing to learn? What are your limitations? When you're talking about confidentiality, what does that mean, right? When you ask them, for example, orienting them to treatment, what should they expect? When you're doing assessment, you know, you want to ask about how long they've been in America. Don't assume, first of all, that they've been in America, they're brand spanking new. They could be generational here. We're not going to assume, we're just going to ask, because if they are new, right? And if you're doing some type of a, I don't know, you're giving your informed consent and you're like, oh, you know, you say something along the line, oh, CPS, APS, you know, if you report any type of abuse, actually talking to them about what is CPS, because a lot countries overseas don't have CPS and APS for the most part. Telling them what the goal of the CPS is, even if you have to file a CPS report, what is the goal of CPS? Oftentimes I've seen clinicians make a CPS report and that's it. And they don't really have a whole lot of say, they don't have a whole lot of say in like, what is the end goal of CPS? Not the number one priority is not to take your kid away, but it's just to make sure that everything is fine. If you need additional support, they're there to support you. Same with APS, right? Explaining APS in what is their end goal, right? And if they are Muslim, let's not assume they're all like the super religious people. Ask them, right? Ask them about, how are you feeling about participating in religious beliefs? And how do you feel about it? They will tell you. And how do you feel about some of the prohibitions, right? Like drinking, drugs, or eating pork, etc. I mean, especially when you're talking to high school kids, youth, transitional age youth group, right? It's very hard. It's very hard to kind of like teach your son or daughter like not to date, for example, because it's not allowed, right? How do you manage that? How do you manage that? Here's your belief system, right? And here you are in school and you like this boy or this girl, whatever. What does that look like to you? You know, just kind of getting that information where they at. And obviously, when it comes to, especially with substance abuse, drinking, drugs, and all of that stuff, anything that it has like a kind of like an addiction component is prohibited for us, like including gambling, including pornography and all that stuff, right? So we don't do that. Be like, we don't want to like off the bat and be like, isn't that forbidden? They know that, making them feel bad about it even more, right? But just kind of like managing, how are they managing with that? Just to kind of like, these are just few things that we could, we touch about, of course. And there's that the FICA assessment. I don't know if you guys have heard of FICA assessment. Yes, no? No? Okay. So FICA assessment, we could incorporate that. And when we do an assessment, you're asking about somebody's beliefs and what is that? How does the client identify? Spirituality, religion is split out in spirituality and religion, but please note that in Islam, spirituality and religion are not mutually exclusive of one another. They're one of each. They're both together. You can be spiritual, not religious, or vice versa. The importance and the influence of it, right? How is your religion, how does it influence your healthcare decision? What does that look like to you? Asking about the community support. Do you have, somewhere in the community that you could go to? Unfortunately, in the Inland Empire, unlike Orange County and LA, we don't have a whole lot of resource centers. We have mosques. People tend to go there. And because of there's the mistrust that we've been talking about, a lot of individuals seeking services, they go to their local imams, which is nothing wrong with that, but majority of the time, these local imams are not trained, right? And learning about, learn how to address spiritual or religious issues in regards to caring for that client, learning about it. Again, stereotyping, I get that a lot as well, even with my own community. When I go, they see my hijab and they're like, start talking to me in Arabic. It's like, I'm not Arab, so I don't understand what you're saying. Confidentiality, limited confidentiality, that could alleviate some of the stress for your clients. Again, focusing on the piece, right? So we don't have like the separated, like unlike Western traditions, therapy is just not is focused by realization, strength, and coping mechanism, and dealing with the past and finding solution, which is great. That works too. But with your Muslim clients, you want to add the spirit, the mind, the soul, the intellect, the body, and the emotion, so they all kind of like correlate with one another. And again, this is a 2-day class, and usually I go in depth with each. Understanding gender roles. So preferably if you have a female client, you want to pair them up with a female therapist. But unlike what you hear out in the media, medical professionals, including therapists, you can't have typically, because the reason why we say that, because we're not supposed to have khilwa, meaning like you're not supposed to be alone with another male. That's not a relative or a husband or whatever. However, but when it comes to medical professional, you can, absolutely you can. People don't know that you can. I had both of my deliveries with my kids, my OBGYN was a male. So that goes out the window. So long as it is for your health, you could have a opposite gender doctor or whoever. Family and member involvement is important because it's a communal community. It's not individualistic like the Western, like here. Involvement with the community is very important. Different last names. So if you notice, a lot of them, I never changed when I was married. I never changed my last name. People typically don't, and that becomes problematic from day to day, especially if you're going to the doctor, schools, or like you're taking your kid overseas, or different TSA lines, like, oh my gosh, your kid has a different last name than you. That is typical. We don't change our last name. Muslim women don't change their last name to their husband's last name. Older generation did, like my mother, for example, changed her last name because it was easier in her immigration papers to come here. But if they've been here, they don't change their last name. So don't find it like, we're not going to assume that it's a divorced couple if they're like, at a school setting or at a hospital setting or whatever, they come together as a family. FYI. Okay, so we're down to the wire. So we kind of like, again, we go into we touch on every part of it, your rational faculty, your ego, your spirit, your heart. Your heart becomes an extremely, again, Hopefully we'll get to do this like a full version and we could go into each in depth with you guys. But just to kind of like understand the importance of a healthy heart from an Islamic perspective. A healthy heart is considered not giving to temptations, being always hopeful. The religion of Islam is actually a very hopeful religion. God says in the Quran, if you're not hopeful, you are not of mine, meaning like it's close to disbelief, hopelessness. Dedication to you're dedicating your life to being a good person. Dedication to life to God does not mean that you're constantly worshiping. The biggest thing is like, yes, you worship God, but then how you treat humanity, right? You strengthen your base or yourself with zikr, with like remembrance of God, right? And then like your eyes are window to your heart. And then we even have like a diet on how to kind of like keep your heart and your body and like how everything is connected and how you eat, right? The Prophet had a saying like keep the 1/3 rule, 1/3 food, 1/3 water, 1/3 air. So you don't want to overeat, meaning, right? So we've seen the benefits of it today scientifically. So a sick heart would look something along the line, being impulsive, manipulated, really living in a fantasy world, not having a whole lot of remorse. And even if somebody, your client, doesn't come and share their remorse, but they feel uncomfortable, that's a good sign that they have done something that they shouldn't have, or they know, but they feel that remorse is a good sign, and you want to like strengthen that. Let's see. In preoccupation with like work and money and life and this, that, and the other, you know, just to kind of taking a step back and kind of refocusing our purpose in life, right? The purpose in life, obviously, to worship God and serve humanity. That is the biggest part. And again, there's some hadiths and some saying of the Prophet about the importance of having a sound heart. He considers one of the best people who have a clean heart with the truthful in speech. Again, we also treat the soul. We have a soul as an accountability, and we have faith in God's predestination, which becomes extremely important when we're dealing with individuals who like, oh my God, why me? Why did this happen to me? Right? So we're kind of going back to that. It's important. Obviously, patience and showing gratitude in refocusing their the anxiety or depression, whatever they may be, to kind of take it back to that. So these are a couple of studies that actually proved to be working with the Muslim client. Narrative exposure therapy. Actually, this was done in Germany with refugees who suffered from trauma. And, you know, it's concluded that, you know, in 12-month follow-up and all 12 clusters, the participants showed a stark improvement. The idea is, again, obviously clients are also able to create their own identity, not something that has been kind of like, you know, thrown at you, you know, in America, especially, right? The racial profiling, what we talked about, it becomes imperative that we kind of like let them do it. But of course, there's like that whole lot of, you know, what happens if somebody, you have a school administrator or school teacher, you know, they're or whatever in their personal life, they're continuing to go through the ongoing trauma, right? So that won't work then. So we have to obviously make sure that they're okay first. And then you have cognitive behavioral therapy, which is actually extremely important. I actually have a book. I'm going to see if you guys could see it. All right. It's not zooming in. So, but I'll just read it to you. It's called Sustenance of the Soul. It's the cognitive behavioral therapy of 9th century physician, Abu Zaid al-Balkhi. It's a fantastic, small, quick read book. There's another research that was done. It's called Islamic Integrated Cognitive Behavioral Therapy by Al-Ghazali, 11th century scholar. IICBT, Islamic Integrated CBT. It's a fantastic way, and it actually breaks it down for you on how to do CBT with a Muslim client in a 12-month in a 12 session. You could do it in group and you could do it individually. So those are fantastic resources for you guys to have. Again, some of the stuff that we kind of like, we want to highlight, and we want to avoid obviously preaching or opposing the patient's, your client's view. We do that regardless, right? DBT actually is very integrated, you know, has like a very strong connection with Islamic teaching. Is the radical acceptance, which is the predestination, the qadr of Allah, like the the mindfulness, the meditation that we do. We could, like the rosary, we also have rosary, you could do dhikr. That could be used as a distress tolerance. There's a whole host of them. The entire DBT, if we know like the basics of Islamic teaching, you could really, every DBT module could be modified. It's very simple to do because it's, like I said, it's very much in line with Islamic teaching. This is wrong dates. But anyhow, if you're looking for online resources, okay, so please do not Google anything. The trusted site, you want to go to Yaqeen Institute. Whyislam.org is a great another source. Know the Prophet, really. There's like so many on YouTube, especially this one gentleman, his name is Sheikh Yasir Khadi. It's like 110 series about the life of the Prophet. It's amazing. If you really want to know the context in the life and all of that, that's there for you. There's an Institute for Muslim Mental Health. There's a Journal of Muslim Mental Health. You guys are more than welcome to get information from and look at different interventions. Locally, there's Sahaba Initiative, who does it's the food pantry and also counseling center. There's Islamic Center, Riverside, Corona, Moreno Valley, Palm Spring, Paris Islamic. These are wrong dates. My next MENA subcommittee is at 2:00 on September 21st. Okay, so that's you guys are more than welcome to join. You can shoot me an email and I'll add you to your invite list. That's my cell phone number. Feel free to call me, text me. You have a client, you want consultation, you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to proceed with them. I'm here for all of you guys. Okay. All right. Any questions? I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you guys.
I have a question, Riba.
Yes.
So you had mentioned about the mistrust that there is.
Mhm.
And so my question really is more of and forgive me if I word this incorrectly, but so are Muslims frequently seeking treatment? And if so, is there a taboo associated with it? Is there shame involved? Is there a negative context for seeking treatment? I just wondered about that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that question. Yes. So there is that mistrust because they don't know. Like I'll give you my example, right? I went to, I used to suffer from depression, really bad, severe depression. Okay. I went in the first therapist I went to, she had no clue who I was all about. She would give me interventions that were inappropriate. I'm like, oh my God, I found myself, the 3 sessions that I saw her, I found myself actually teaching her. And I'm like, oh, I don't have time for this. Therapist number 2 was basically, he was awesome, great guy. However, it's like, basically the gist of it came down to 9/11 is not your fault. Like, I know, can we talk about my depression now, my day-to-day? Right? The third therapist that I still have, she's amazing. And she has like a basic knowledge, right? And she'll ask me questions. So yes, there is the taboo. It's shaming. Therapy inherently is shaming, right? You're like opening your dirty air to somebody you don't know. But I'll tell you this much too, Shuri, is that if the Muslim client, I actually had a consultation call yesterday. Somebody calls like, I want couples therapy. Do you know anybody? But I don't want a Muslim therapist because I don't want to see him in my local mosque or community or whatever. So they rather go to a non-Muslim outside of the community to seek out treatment. That's why it becomes extremely imperative for non-Muslim clinicians to learn the basics. So they're all going to come to you. They're not going to come to me. They're going to come to you guys because it's like, oh my gosh, is she judging me? Even though we know, like, we're trained not to judge, correct? But they still have that, I rather not. It's very much the same from what I hear. I'm a part of that community, the AAPI community. They rather not go to another, Asian clinician. They rather go somewhere else to kind of like, it's too close for comfort, I guess.
So they're seeking anonymity.
Thank you. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions?
How can somebody who wants to just invest more time and energy into learning more, is there a specific training series, or is there a certification process? Well, maybe not a certification, because this is, you know, I don't know necessarily, but is there a way that as a clinician to just be more aware and continue to learn about the different nuances of the Muslim culture and how to be a better clinician?
Yes, thank you for asking that. Yes, actually, you know, if you go to the Muslim Mental Health Journal, they have amazing resources over there for clinicians, right? On interventions, and you could learn the basics. Honestly, I was telling Mindy before the training, I was supposed to have a training with the WET, a 2-day training, which is like, I think 6.5 CE courses on how to treat Muslim clients, but that's going to be more than likely at the end of the year. We'll see. I haven't heard back. So if that comes out, you know, you're more than welcome to join. And if, you know, you could get 6.5 credits. But for the time being, if you have questions in particular, you could always reach out to me and I could guide you on how to, like, the basics, like whyislam.org, for example, is a fantastic source to learn the basics and a little bit more depth, right? Not in the hour and a half that we have, but also like Muslim mental health, on how to kind of, like Dr. Awad, actually, she's at Stanford University. It's called Muslim Mental Health Lab at Stanford University. She does fantastic series. She even has series on YouTube. Dr. Rania Awad, fantastic. There's another book, Applying Islamic Principle to Clinical Mental Health, Introducing Traditional Islamic Integrated Psychotherapy. This is, again, is edited. I mean, it's translated, and I guess it's actually translated by Rania Awad from Stanford University. So there's like a whole host of different ways that you guys could get information and learn different techniques on serving the community.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Of course. Oh, yes, I could write it down. Yes, I'll write down the list. Okay, the book title. All right. Any other question?
There was one that came in from Dakota in the chat, just
Mhm.
about suicide stigma and how it's considered a mortal sin. I think how it was worded, but does this have an effect on the prevalence of suicide in this population?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so it is suicide being considered a sin. That's why we don't have, like I said, actual statistics on it. I mean, unfortunately, obviously, now there is talks of how that is not considered a mortal sin, for example, right? It's not. Some scholars will tell you that it's not a mortal sin, okay? Because if somebody is not in the right mind, right, and they're in so much pain, and if they, you know, attempt or complete suicide, then it's not considered immoral because they're not in the right mind, right? They're depressed. That's what they're trying to escape a pain that they're feeling at the moment. So the tide is shifting, but traditionally, that's why it's considered that, right? But that's what majority of people will think about it. I don't know if that answers your question. But again, there's more awareness in the past 10, 15 years. There's more awareness in the community, which is fantastic news for us. That, you know, hey, you know, mental illness is a thing, stigma is a thing. Managing two cultures in America, especially with the youth, is a thing. Let's talk about it. Let's not, you know, shove it under the rug. None of that. So there's more open, candid conversations in the community, and actually, they're starting to do. I actually wanted to do this, and with Riverside County Mosque is called a training the imams. That's where people feel comfortable the most to go for any issues, because like I said, we don't have a whole lot of resource centers. So they will go to the mosque because it also serves as a resource center to train the mosque to the imams. You're not a clinician, you could do X, Y, and Z, but in case you have X, Y, you know, this, please refer them here, and here's the list of all of you guys. RUHS behavioral and its contractors. So we're trying to get that going. We'll see how that happens. We'll see. Yeah,
Okay, thank you so much, Riba, for being with us this afternoon. I can talk and just for sharing all this information. Looking forward to also when that 2-day one does come about. If anyone's interested from here, we'll be sure to share out that registration information. I did share in the chat the link for the survey. I'm going to just copy paste and drop it in there again. So we'd love to have your feedback. But thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being with us this afternoon, and looking forward to seeing you at our next presentation.
thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Mindy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.